Welcome to this Academy for Teachers masterclass on the stories and things with Rivka Galchen. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the Academy for Teachers for sponsoring, and thank you Rivka for sharing your experience with us. I'm Marilyn Lawrence. I've been teaching for decades, the last 8 years of which I've been at the Trinity School teaching English and history. And ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a teacher. It started with my loving to boss around my younger siblings, whom I coerced into play acting as my students. But it quickly developed into a love of learning with a community of young minds that are curious, serious, silly, and inspiring. And as Golding says, I dropped my hobby and turned professional. I'm a proud fellow of the Academy for Teachers, an organization that infuses me with inspiration time and time again. And I'm humbled by the caliber of teachers from so many diverse schools whom I've met through the Academy. I've learned so much being put back into the place of student in the seminars, and for that, I am grateful. Today, I have the honor of introducing Rivka Galchen. Rivka is a critically acclaimed essayist and fiction writer who writes regularly for The New Yorker. She holds a BA in English from Princeton University and an MD from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I've been savoring Rivka's novel Atmospheric Disturbances and her story collection American Innovations. And if you have not yet gotten the pleasure of reading these works, you are in for a real treat. I particularly love how Rivka captures in her writing the extraordinary within the ordinary. And I'm thus excited, and I must admit a little nervous, to dive into this seminar, Stories in Things, as a student myself. Rivka is not the only star of this masterclass. It is also my honor to introduce the 12 teachers here today who are selected from many applicants. This is an impressive group with varied advanced degrees. We teach grades 1 through 12 in public schools, charter schools, and independent schools. We teach such varied topics as Tolstoy's War and Peace, sci-fi utopias and dystopias, Arabian Nights, integrated liberal studies. We coach or advise numerable extracurriculars, including Slavic Affairs Club, Intellectual Disabilities Volunteers, Baking Club, Student Fashion Magazine, Odyssey of the Mind, just to name a few. There's a lot of teaching experience here today. We've been in the classroom between 4 and 25 years. The total number of years we've been teaching is 198. We teach between 20 and 170 kids. The number of children who know our names is 1,119, and that's just this year alone. So your real audience today, Rivka, are those 1,119 students, and the 1,100 students we'll have next year, and the next, and the next, because every teacher here will, in some way, share with them what we learn from you. The ripple effect of a masterclass is tremendous. So thank you, Dr. Galchen, for being here. Thank you to my fellow teachers for teaching. And with that, let the masterclass begin. Rivka, take it away.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was beautiful. And it was so fun to have the little chance to talk with at least some of you in the breakout room. So I wanted to frame what the hour will be, and then we'll get into it. Basically, on some level, I've organized it as an homage to my own high school English teacher, who was an amazing teacher who I still think about the things that she taught me pretty much every week it comes up. And what I find like most interesting to me is that I feel that I missed like 2/3 of what she was saying to us, but that she sort of knew that we were missing it, and they were just like sailing out there as like little seeds. And so that's why I was interested to come back to this essay, because I remember when she taught it to us, and she was sort of like I grew up in Norman, Oklahoma, which is not like the most liberal place in the world. And no one had to sit at a desk if they didn't want to. And there were sort of just strange things all over the wall. And there were no rules and there were no exams, but it was the most intense class that we had. And also, like, I didn't like place this at the time, but she was, in retrospect, I just think it's very interesting how she chose this essay, given like the kind of person who she was. And her PhD was on images of Native Americans in kind of sermons in the 18th century. You know, just like it just thought like all of that was like coming together in an interesting way when I returned to the essay at different times in my life. So that was how I wanted to get that essay in here. But because the way most of us students remembered this essay was just as like the essay with the 3 statues and the Jaja fish. That was like something we all loved to say, and we thought it was so funny. And so I was thinking about how that structure enables the essay to travel across time, because we all had that to hold on to. So I wanted to start with 2 pretty famous, really short pieces. One is more of a story, one is more of a memoir, one is by George Saunders, and one is by Sejal Shah. And I'll put it in the chat, and we'll get like a small discussion because it's very vivid how they're using objects to tell their story. So we'll spend a little bit of time on each of those shorts, and then we'll come to the essay. So could I get a volunteer to read, one volunteer to read the first paragraph of this short and another to read the second paragraph? Let me make sure it, let me get it pasted. It won't let me have. All right, guys, hold on. Oh. Sorry, guys. I don't know why this isn't pasting into the chat. Give me 1 second. Does someone know better than me how this would
Rachel, can you?
work?
Or what's the title?
It's Sticks by George Saunders.
Mhm.
I apologize, guys. I'm on sabbatical. I like have missed out on becoming an expert at Zoom, but I thought I knew. Here, there we go. Thank you. So does someone, would someone read the first paragraph out loud for us? Shreya?
1 second. Every year Thanksgiving night, we flocked out behind Dad as he dragged the Santa suit to the road and draped it over a kind of crucifix he'd built out of a metal pole in the yard. Super Bowl week, the pole was dressed in a jersey and Rod's helmet, and Rod had to clear it with Dad if he wanted to take the helmet off. On the 4th of July, the pole was Uncle Sam. On Veterans Day, a soldier. On Halloween, a ghost. The pole was Dad's only concession to glee. We were allowed a single Crayola from the box at a time. One Christmas Eve, he shrieked at Kimmy for wasting an apple slice. He hovered over us as we poured ketchup, saying, "Good enough, good enough, good enough." Birthday parties consisted of cupcakes, no ice cream. The first time I brought a date over, she said, "What's with your dad in that pole?" And I sat there blinking.
Thank you. Would someone want to read the sort of response paragraph, the second paragraph? I'll read it, but Christy, will you read it? Thank you.
We left home, married, had children of our own, found the seeds of meanness blooming also within us. Dad began dressing the pole with more complexity and less discernible logic. He draped some kind of fur over it on Groundhog Day and lugged out a floodlight to ensure a shadow. When an earthquake struck Chile, he laid the pole on its side and spray painted a rift in the earth. Mom died and he dressed the pole up as death and hung from the crossbar photos of Mom as a baby. We'd stop by and find old talismans from his youth arranged around the base. Army medals, theater tickets, old sweatshirts, tubes of Mom's makeup. One autumn, he painted the pole bright yellow. He covered it with cotton swabs that winter for warmth and provided offspring by hammering in 6 cross sticks around the yard. He ran lengths of string between pole and the sticks and taped to the string letters of apology, admissions of error, pleas for understanding, all written in a frantic hand on index cards. He painted a sign saying love and hung it from the pole, and another that said forgive. And then he died in the hall with the radio on, and we sold the house to a young couple who yanked out the pole and the sticks and left them by the road on garbage day.
Thank you. So I know like when you take something in immediately, it's different than when you've had time to think it over, but I sometimes think there's something positive about that, about sort of like what's the most kind of immediate interface with the work of art, whatever it might be. So I guess I wanted to start with a craft question, which is like, how would you describe how the pole functions in the story, or what the pole allows the story to be, whether that might be its brevity, its emotional intensity, or how it limits it? Like, how would you describe like the function of the pole, just as almost a storytelling mechanism? Because it can feel like a cheesy conceit, or it can really work.
I think for me, it really successfully demonstrated like chronology, like because all the things that are hung upon it like have different places throughout the year. So for me, it was like almost like the center of the setting was the time.
I think that's such a great observation, especially because that first paragraph, like you said, covers like the calendar year, and then it makes that second move into kind of like many years really kind of work, because it's already established it. And in Objects in Time, I think is it almost always works. Any other thanks, Kate, that was awesome. Any other observations, John?
Yeah, it really reminded me about one of my favorite books I've ever taught, which was The Things They Carried, and how, you know, the objects in the pockets of all the soldiers really define and characterize them. And in some ways that stick, which, you know, the father drapes with different objects and surrounds it like a shrine, really, and offerings to his whatever impulse he has, is just kind of a really beautiful way of characterizing the dad. And that's what it seems like, a little homage to him.
Definitely. Karen? Or is it Karen?
It's Karen.
Okay.
It's Karen, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm a Karen, except not with a K at least. But to me, the pole seems like an X-ray, like it's like a skeleton sort of, or a scarecrow. And it just occurred to me, one interesting thing about the story is that we're talking about the pole, but the title is Sticks. So he's like pulling our attention away from the pole to the sticks. I had to go back and reread the second paragraph to see where the sticks came in. And it seems like if the pole is a representation of some kind of his, like the rigid core of his father, the sticks maybe seem to me almost like children, or some, like, you know, this kind of generational, like what does that pole spawn? These little sticks with of memories. I don't know. That's the image that occurs to me, the X-ray and the scarecrow.
I think that's you said many beautiful things, but two things really stand out. One, the incredible power of the title to kind of redirect your reread of a piece. And I agree, the way the little sticks are short and laid out makes them feel like the children, and therefore like the speaker, right? But then the other thing, when you say it's like an X-ray, I sort of feel like part of the reason I think the story works, if you think the story works, is its associative logic is so powerful. The sort of scarecrow, flagpole, crucifix, all those images that are aggregated near it work really well. I'm sorry, I'm being shouted at. 1 minute. Sorry, there's more classes going on in the room, as I'm sure you're all like familiar, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. But then I also wanted to ask you a counterfactual. Often when I really like a story, I think about the bad way I would have written it. And I sort of feel like this is a story, which is one way you could describe it. I mean, there's many ways you could describe it. You could say, okay, like this is a story about like a really strict father who then thinks, what happened to my family? Where are they? Can I reclaim their love? Can I communicate with them again? And you know, I might have written the story, you know, with like, oh, he's sitting in his chair, he's wondering why no one's with him. You know, it just wouldn't have been so powerful. So I just wanted to think about that for a minute. Like, how would you describe like the affect of the story? Does it connect you emotionally? And does the sticking so closely to the stick or pole enhance the affect or diminish the affect? does it make the story fit more emotion in or less? Because of course there's, you know, we don't meet the mom, etc. Like there's so many things we don't get. So what do you think we get out of kind of constraining the story in this way? Kind of pushing it through that narrow slit of that one characteristic of the dad, the pole. Sorry, Kate.
That's okay. As we were talking, you know, I kind of looked at this more as like almost as if the pole was like the representative of the dad himself. Like he had this like frugality about him where like when they were sprinkling ketchup on their food, he'd be like, that's enough. Or they were only allowed to use one crayon at a time. Like he was more interested in like saving things than he was in spending time and making memories with his own children. And like as he got older, like those things like love and forgive like were at the forefront of his mind. Like I was trying to love you, but I was more concerned with saving stuff and like, do you forgive me because now I don't have any time left. And so like those sticks for me kind of connected those dots. And he put like the strings between the pole and the sticks. It was like he was connecting with his children and they were the sticks, but they were like surrounding him and he was trying to making these offshoots of who he was as a person. And for me, that emotion was just like really riddled in there when he said forgive with a question mark, because it was like he was trying to communicate and it didn't work. So the emotion in that really short bit really hit me hard when I read it the second time, because this is someone who clearly didn't know how to communicate without brevity. And he tried really hard and then it was too late. So for me, that emotion is definitely there.
That's beautiful. And I feel like brevity is a key word. Jessica? I didn't see the order the hands went up, so I'm just going on my screen.
Hi. So I had a similar impression. I think what the sticks did for me was just like because we were so focused on this just like random, like kind of like a cross image, kind of like a flagpole. It's kind of like, it was like almost a little bit ambiguous of like what it actually looked like, to me at least. It made like all those the things associated with it in the second paragraph so much more like sad. Like it was very like the start thing, like, oh, it's like, oh, mom died, and then you put these like pictures, it dressed up as death and hung pictures of her as a baby. Like it's just so absurd, but it was like really I found it very sad and affecting in that way, just because like it was so weird.
Yeah, no, I also think that's a great like observation of what's kind of like almost the fingerprint of George Saunders, is the kind of comedy disarms you and opens you up to have an emotion that you might normally be defended against, like sadness. Marilyn?
I love the way that imagery works. I find it to be a really strong anchor throughout through the entire piece, and the way it opens with being compared to a crucifix, you know, gives it gravitas from the start, but then it quickly becomes apparently whimsical. So then when it turns back again, I'm kind of expecting, I'm set up for it, but I found it unexpected as well. And I thought that it really worked well in giving me a place as a reader to read into it, and thus it became more emotional for me, because I was projecting onto it and filling in the lacunae of this character, kind of as it seems like the secondary characters were as well, and the narrator was trying to piece together this character who was not communicating directly, but through kind of through a double in a way, and taking those clues meant that I was working, and I in a way that I was bringing a lot to the narrative, which makes me think that this is the first time I've ever read it, but were I to read it again and again, I would be feeling differently depending on where I am in my emotional state at that time.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful observation, that skeleton shape leaves a lot of room to bring your own emotion into it. Shreya, we'll have a couple more comments and then we're going to look at that piece by Sejal Shah.
I just appreciate your opening of that. It's not this sort of very emotional dad sort of looking back on his life. I just love how they sort of, you get these accents or these emotions that are seeping through the cracks and they shine brighter for that. I think even just that like trademark Saunders sort of humility or compassion, where it's sort of like the found seeds of meanness blooming also within us. The love and the forgive for sure. And then I just love actually the closing image too, that this like young couple then just like leaves it on the road for garbage day, which like, of course you would do with the trash that you see. And so this thing that's been infused with so much meaning, you sort of get that closing image that wrenches it.
It's amazing how much is fit into those two paragraphs, including that kind of almost frame shift of like how meaningful the stick and pole become to you by the end, and how meaningless they are to others we're describing by. It's like so. Christy?
I was thinking about, what fits like within his glee, because there's the line that the pole was dad's only concession to glee. And so with that, I mean, first, when you get the crucifix, I was thinking one thing, and then I got to this, okay, this is the only moments for glee, for joy, basically. And so I read the rest of it through that lens, and I had to read it again because when I read it aloud, I couldn't absorb it quite the way if I was hearing it, would if I was hearing it. But so I thought that was just really interesting, like to think about all these moments, like how happy they made him, even though it was sad. And then the end with leaving it by the road, I kind of just felt that. But I also was thinking, you had mentioned that you often like to think about how you would have written it badly. And so I imagine this as if, had Saunders like written out this whole piece about his dad and then kind of did an erasure. That's what I felt like. These were some of those bright spots, even if they were still sad. That's just sort of what I was thinking about, but I think it works really well in such a small space, as you've said. So.
Well, you guys, I'm going to put up another piece that does like 3 sets of 3, and I'm going to ask probably for help since I failed so gloriously the last time, but let me try one more time. So I think that, yeah. Rachel, can you help me put up Curriculum by Sejal Shah? Yep. It's in conjunctions. It should pop up, right?
Just 1 second. And there it is.
Okay, this just to offer like the framing, because I know it's hard to take it in immediately, even though it's nice to notice what works immediately. This one has a series of 3. Each one follows a different object, but you'll see the objects are related, but you'll see the way she develops the object story. Would someone read area studies, part 1 of the short? Sam, I like your reading voice. Will you read it for us? I want to give the teachers a break. I know they're talking all day.
Unmute. Okay. Area studies. The map was printed on a handkerchief. It is a map of a place that no longer exists, British East Africa. On a handkerchief, you can hold the Republic of Tanganyika near your nose. Around the carved out section of Africa float pictures, symbols, a rhinoceros, a bird you cannot identify. Strangely, we had 2 maps, nearly identical, except that the print on the handkerchiefs, the outlines of the place were slightly blurry. Neither was perfect. I was always thinking about stretching these handkerchiefs, ironing them, framing them for a present for our mother who was from there, but nothing came of that. I was a child who wanted perfect. They were hers, so it would have been giving something of hers back to her, What kind of gift is that? A good one or a sad one or both? I never did it. I still find them from time to time.
Thank you, Sam. And let's hold on to that. I still find them from time to time. Would someone volunteer to read the next stanza, Women's Studies? Maybe Marilyn, thank you.
I realized I was muted. Sorry about that. Women's Studies. 3 embroidered cream-colored cloths, or are they 2, float in the kitchen. They are not framed the way stitching, cross-stitching, and needlepoint are framed in other people's front hallways and parlors and living rooms and above stairs. They are not framed at all. They are not letters, pilgrim blue. They are not a repetition of vowel sounds, of consonants. They do not linger. They are flowers and they curl. They taunt me. What was it that I meant to do? To frame, to hang up. Nothing done. Were they part of what women had to do to show some sort of mastery over the smallest surface? I will never embroider like that. We had latch hook, just hours of watching the guiding light in all my children and hooking. The ugliest designs and colors until some design, oversized red and blue mushrooms in a field grew, mold-like, in shag rug splendor.
Thank you. And would someone volunteer to read the last stanza? Erin?
Let me pull it up. Okay. Visual studies. My friend Anne says use the old frames and wear them. Replace the lenses. I too wear glasses. This is the one way I know I belong to my family since I don't really resemble them. They are my mother's cat eye glasses from the 60s, or maybe it was the 70s. They are broken and I cannot bear to get rid of them. I keep them in the blue and white flowered glasses case she always used. I keep them in a wooden box that says Buffalo Baking Powder Company and that I bought one summer at an antique fair. I was not even 25. What did I know then of the way things break down? Of the way I would and one day did. I want to believe I will wear her glasses one day. I keep thinking about these objects that have no particular use, how I study them, 2 handkerchief maps of an area now called something else, pale needle-pointed flowers, unframed, spectacles with black and gold rims, a relic signifying forthcoming absence, these glasses of a mother I will lose one day.
Thank you, Erin. That was a beautiful reading. So I guess like we could just start. I know it sounds basic, but I somehow feel like it always surprises me how powerful the objects can be. Like what does, we have basically 3 paragraphs and we have the handkerchiefs and the cloths and the glasses. So I guess what is, what is the writer getting out of focusing on just these 3 objects? Sort of how much life gets covered by it, just as a strategy. Like, what do you think, what does the story even feel like it's about? Does it feel like it's about these objects? Do these objects open up to something else? This is like a mechanism. Jessica?
Hi. So it seemed to me that like these objects are so everyday, and it's like, it doesn't seem like she's lost her mother yet from that last paragraph, but that she's looking at all these, she looks at her past. I think she might have immigrated here somewhere else, unless those are just handkerchiefs she had. I had to reread it again. And then they like the needle point and then the glasses. They're just like these very small everyday objects. And she's like thinking about how, one day she will lose her mother, and these everyday things are the things that she's like trying to hold on to. It was interesting to like look at that being, she's thinking about this already when her mother, again, I think is still around, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, and I love that observation that sort of totally different from the Saunders, where the object, the pole, is exceptional in the sense that like that's an unusual house with a pole out front. And these objects are so, you know, familiar and sort of in all of our houses. Dorothy? I can't hear you.
I
there
was
you are.
muted. I know. I thought I clicked it, but I guess I didn't click it enough. What struck me about each of the passages as I had to go back a little bit and look, and I realized that I think each of these things does have something to do with her mother and her relationship with her mother. And so, like, you know, the first thing was the handkerchiefs that have the map of the place where her mother's from, right? And, you know, of course, the glasses, it's very clear. She talks about how they belong to her mother and she doesn't want to get rid of them. And she knows she's going to lose her mother one day. I feel like the middle one with those cloths that she didn't frame, and it's more like what she and her mother did together, maybe, and what she feels like she was supposed to have done, like how her relationship with her mother was unique to her and her mother, but somehow she feels like it was lacking something. Like there was something that you know, when she talks about those cloths that are taunting her, that they're, you know, that she didn't preserve something that she should have preserved somehow. I don't know, like I wasn't quite sure exactly where she was going, you know, if I have to go back and like read them all again, but that was the feeling I was getting. Like this is like her relationship with her mother that's somehow special to her, but there's like something missing, you know. She wants to give her mother a framed handkerchief, but that's giving her a gift that's already hers. So, you know, what's the good of that? And then, you know, I don't know. I feel like it's like some kind of she's feeling like she was missing out on something with her mother, and I haven't really quite put my finger on it, but that's the feeling I get, like of loss or something that she never had.
No, I love it. And also the way she ends, like you're saying, the way it's sort of these things that are present and not present. That her mother seems on the one hand alive but absent, that the gift has been thought of but not given, the framing has been conceived of but not done. Liz?
Yeah, it was interesting because I haven't read this, but it was just almost like anxiety of how things sort of pass out of meaning and like how we ascribe things with meaning. And we almost feel that kind of nervousness that without, you know, certain reference points, like they will also fall out of meaning. At one point, those glasses will no longer be her mother. It's like she has those, you know, the handkerchief of like the vanished place that obviously still physically exists, but its name and its referent has long since disappeared. And it kind of spoke to the Sanders piece a little bit, this idea of these things that we cobble together meaning something to us, and just as quickly, without those rather essential pieces, they lose their meaning just as quickly. And how we're just sort of, as people, having was this anxiety of like, these things mean so much to us, or they should mean something to us, or they meant something at one point and that's why they're important, but how they carry into the future is something that's also another pressure as well, that they will also lose their meaning, just like the sticks are just sticks by the side of the road by the end of it. Just like, you know, the things were never framed, these glasses will become something else. Like already at the beginning of the third paragraph, the friend's like, well, why don't you just wear them? Or how are you going to use this in this future as we're moving into it? So I don't know, there was this anxiety of like ascribing meaning, which I thought was really touching. And so and also, you know, I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever watched Hoarders, but I mean, I think that's definitely that idea as well, that we like, there's so much, you know, these fragments we shore against our ruin, right? And they just as slowly drift away. Their meaning is the people that connected to them also drift away. So I don't know, it was really sad.
Karen, did you have your hand up?
I thought it was, am I heard?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting how she took these domestic objects in the domestic setting and put it in this frame of this academic, like a course catalog. And it reminded me, like all three of these pieces you've offered to us have something to do with what adults are sort of like accidentally teaching children or younger people just by the way they are in the world. And as a parent and a teacher, I feel a lot of pressure realizing that I'm always in one way or another teaching, whether I want to be or not, or whether I feel, as I was telling the breakout group, using Golding's language, like whether I feel integrated or not, I am like structurally in the position of teaching, instructing, whatever. It reminds me of a phrase, I think I heard it like at a professional development or something, implicit curriculum, the idea that even when you're not consciously crafting a curriculum, like the way Rivka, you remembered objects from your teacher's classroom, and that's part of her pedagogy, albeit implicitly. I just thought that was interesting, that collision of domestic and academic, and what she learned at home, watching Guiding Light or whatever. My mom watched Guiding Light too, so I know all about that crazy shit that unfolded in Guiding Light in the 70s. Anyway.
Thank you. No, it's such a, I hadn't thought of that way, that it connects to the Golding, the sort of the implicit or the kind of unspoken, unintended curriculum. Christy?
I was just really struck by all the framing that's happening. There's like the title curriculum, which gave me a frame, and then the three smaller titles. But then each piece is also considering a kind of frame, like the map, in the square, and then the embroidery, in those squares, they're not framed. And then the frames of the glasses, like there's just so many different frames. And then I'm thinking, I'm in the process of moving too. Like if you could see this room, there's stuff everywhere. But so the idea of like there's stuff that's unframed, is like what makes something like authentic and established, and like in terms of like a poster or whatever. Often frames do that. So I was just thinking, yeah, there's like something about I haven't worked it out so eloquently yet, but just thinking about, there's something about the framing, like she's looking for a frame to establish some of these pieces or establish the way she feels about them. That's kind of what came up for me, especially with the title. Like there's so many different layers of framing that came to mind as I was looking it over again.
Yeah, that's so well observed. And I do think also, I mean, it's like it sounds like a tacky thing to pay attention to, but I think that those echoes, both the ones that are consciously noticed and not, the sort of the threes and the frames and the way they work together, and the way that she slips the sort of mom's loss without losing her. I think those things all make the thing hover longer or last longer in someone's head, like they're almost trying to be solved. You're like, oh, I intuit all these patterns. And it's sort of just like, I feel like that is part of how it lodges in there. I was going to ask you guys, do you sort of see ways that these can be used to build? Can you imagine building an exercise off of these little shorts for your class? Like what kind of exercise do you think would be productive using these as models? Marilyn?
Well, it reminded me of an exercise that I do with my 11th graders in English for the personal essay unit, where we read Virginia Woolf's Moth, and then I bring them to the Cooper Hewitt, or pre-COVID, I brought them to the Cooper Hewitt, and they choose an object and they write about the object. They're writing about themselves, but without writing about themselves. So they're putting themselves in the background by writing about the object. So this reminded me a lot of that technique of how, which I think it's just one way that we're trying to get into, one approach into personal essay writing. And I think for me, it's useful because when I start teaching personal essay unit, a lot of times students think that it has to be confessional, that they have to put everything out there. And so what I'm trying to convey, that it has to be, from a genuine truth and authenticity, but it doesn't have to be confessional nor even apparently on the surface about you. But when we read deeper, we realize that it is about you, which can make for really great writing. And it can also be, I think, helpful for writers, for students who don't feel comfortable, spilling their guts onto the page. So this, taking objects and writing about them, where we are then inquiring about, and the other students can read this and inquire about what was kind of the kernel underneath that was really itching the writer, and they had to express themselves.
That's a fantastic. I'm like, can I pitch that? He's like, that's such a good idea. John?
I was thinking, with sticks and how we celebrate different holidays. And I know kids really come from a lot of different cultures in my classroom, and they love to talk about their what they do or how they celebrate stuff. So, just the different objects, the foods, the decorations and stuff for all of the holidays, like the father puts out for each holiday, would be a way maybe into them thinking about how they represent their values and traditions and objects and rituals.
And I also love that, because I'm sure they'd all like to read each other's pieces, which also seems like a wonderful way to kind of build that kind of knowing. Erin?
I'm just going to share in the chat a link to the Tenement Museum. They offer an opportunity for teachers and students to share writing around an object. So I put the link in where students get to just choose an image of the object and then they write about it, if folks are interested.
Thank you. That is so good. And I love the way that it's like a double portrait, like Marilyn was saying, like the portrait of the object and the quiet portrait of the person thinking about the object makes like a great kind of binocular vision. William, I think you had your hand up.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, okay. I have the students select an object in their home and then personify the object and have the object not even necessarily talk about themselves, although I've had students pick a comb, and then the student goes on about what the comb thinks of that person's hair, what that person thinks. But then I've had the students take their pet in their home and what the pet thinks of the home situation. And it is a way, I like that idea of the personal essay. It's a way to like go into their world without their having to go into themselves, which they sometimes feel uncomfortable with. So, and it's fun. They love reading those pieces and sharing those pieces with each other. And during the COVID, we were in COVID last year, and it's when I did the assignment. Actually, it's a takeoff from a Billy Collins does a piece with a dog, which is pretty funny. So it's a good setup.
So I wanted to move on to the William Golding essay, which kind of like does a much longer form version of trying to tell a story, a personal story through the objects. And I guess like I wanted to start by asking you guys why you think my English teacher might have chosen this for this room of 17-year-olds. Like I thought, I think it's interesting how the essay has like evolved for me. And in our breakout rooms, Dorothy was saying how, especially, when the sort of what he calls second degree thinking is so adolescent. And when I got older, I sort of thought, wow, like I really feel like my teacher was sneakily giving us a mirror to look into, and I totally didn't notice that at the time at all. So I kind of wanted to think about like what are the teachables in this piece? Like one is how the statues are used maybe, or I just want to think about like what feels like, how would this piece, what in this piece interacts well with a young person? Like what could a young person learn from it, either structurally, content-wise, or anything. Because I think it's interesting at the end, you know, I don't even know if I like this guy, but I sort of love the essay. Like, I love the way that the essay is built in a way that I'm still thinking about it, right? I'm still like, I wonder if I've ever had a third level thought, or I'm just doomed to a life of second level thinking. And I don't know. So I just want to kind of articulate what the sort of like objects or the people who seem to be like a shadow of the objects, the different teachers, Einstein, they also seem to be kind of like there in a trilogy. So any observations of what you think might be distillable from the essay, especially for teaching about putting together a piece of writing? Or even what do you guys think of the way that there's like a little tiny writerly trick that he does again and again here, the way he introduces the statuettes is one example. So the introduction of the Venus de Milo is like this. One was a lady wearing nothing but a bath towel. She seemed frozen in an eternal panic lest the bath towel slip down any farther. And since she had no arms, she was in an unfortunate position to pull the towel up again. What do you guys think about that technique of describing a really well-known object? Or like, is there something to borrow there? What does he get from doing it that way? Instead of, you know, we're adults reading the essay, he could be like, you know, my teacher had the Venus de Milo, Rodin's thinker, and a crouching leopard. Karen?
I guess one way I could imagine getting students to start thinking about the essay is by asking them to identify shifts in perspective. And that's like the shift from the naive perspective to the more seasoned perspective. You know, the naive perspective who doesn't recognize that that's a famous statue and thinks it's a towel and whatever. And then the way that tracks with the speaker's maybe not exactly compassion for those teachers that were so harshly judged at the beginning, but understanding of the teachers and the, you know, appreciation for something like libido or even, you know, like hypocrisy that he sees in his teachers. You know, the recognition that being that third level thinker, first level thinker is actually as hard as being an Einstein. And that perspective, he does lots of little moments of shifting perspective throughout the story where you can see like, oh, there's a movement there, or there's a shift, a dynamic motion, like the fish.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think actually John in our breakout room was talking about that, about how it kind of manages this thinker at different ages and the way that it sort of is doing those shifts. What about the sort of, do the statues feel sort of like they've found their final destiny by the end, or does it seem like there's like other ways you might organize them? Because it's so, you know, sad at the end. Venus de Milo just kind of, she apparently doesn't need to interact with anything else. She's just like off to the side and complete. So I kind of was curious if you think there's something, a way to make the essay feel like it can continue or open up. I often think like, okay, well, like how would I at different moments in my life, like organize these statues? Is that like a way to open up? Is that a way to open up a way into either this essay or something else, to sort of say, okay, like take an object and describe it how you would see it at age 10, age 20, age 30, age 40.
He does say that second grade thinking is uncreative, like it just destroys and it doesn't create. and rearranging the statues is a creative act. So I think there's like the hope, he goes into the headmaster's office and rearranges the statues himself. So it's like some kind of opening and making, which he obviously is doing in the essay too.
Yeah, and kind of a sort of an ongoingness, like an ongoing shifting. But yeah, what I wanted to go back a tiny bit just for a moment to think about what the essay gets out of being framed with these statues and with returning to them at the end, with kind of altered the way they become more known. Like, what did you guys think even about? I also love the description of Rodin's thinker as a naked, muscular gentleman who sat looking down with his chin on his fist and his elbow on his knee. He seemed utterly miserable. I sort of want to think, and the statues are described as glimmering whitely, and then the teachers are also sort of described in that way. So what do you think, how do you think the essay benefits from having that kind of replication? The three statues, and then Mr. Houghton, Miss Parton, Miss Parsons, Einstein, those sorts of levels of repetitions and threes. Do you see like something that can grow out of that a student could use when they're doing their own work? Liz?
Well, I mean, one thing I liked was it was so infinitely recognizable, the almost cosmology of like the universe as being told by school, right? It's like this miserable kid is once again in the office and the story is being told about it. He's obviously a failure at whatever he's supposed to be doing. And he sees these become objects of his universe. And by the end, he's able to sort of control them or rewrite them, or sort of write the story that he wants to see. At the end, he says, I'm no longer a hobbyist. I didn't end up proceeding into second grade thinking I'm going to keep plunging forward. I'm a professional thinker. And so he's continuing to kind of manipulate or move them around as he sees fit, as opposed to them being fixed objects of the universe. Like when you're a child and the rule of three and the fairy tales, everything's very fixed. And by the end, he's really sort of, I think the problem of being a first level thinker is that you have to constantly keep plunging onwards. Like there is no stopping place. And once you stop, and then you stop, and I think he's sort of engaging with that. So there is I think the ongoingness of it is the idea that I have to keep thinking about these things and rearranging my statues. At this moment, love is like, yeah, I know about love. She's over there. But this notion of like, there's always that leopard, like, while the thinker is just sort of like ruminating about like shadows and shapes and like dustiness, there's a leopard poised right behind him at all times. And I think that paying attention to that, having that leopard always on your back, is the energy that kind of ends the piece.
No, I thought that was great, Liz. Yeah, I think another thing I wanted to just like point out about this piece is that I sometimes feel like it's really great to have some sense of what you want to do, but I feel like it's usually even better when some other smarter part of yourself is able to sneak in there and kind of do something. Like I feel like when Marilyn was describing like having the students describe something very much outside of themselves, I feel like one of the things that's so magical about that is the students are probably, I'm told, you guys work with younger people than I do, but so used to self-representing again and again and again. And of course, like that feeling of that not being genuine comes from somewhere, and it's probably, they're all probably striving for being genuine, and it's so hard to get there, and that there's something about being a little less in control by interacting with this thing outside of yourself that weirdly enough lets something very genuine and personal come through. And I think that's very true about structure. Like structure can be that thing outside of yourself, and that's what I see in this essay now that I'm older. When I was young, I was very impressed with kind of like his idea about the different kinds of thinking and aspiring to third level thinking. And then when I got a little older, I thought, oh, our teacher was telling us that we should stop tearing things down all the time and think that that's what intelligence is. And then again, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I also feel like she was showing us something about how structure is its own kind of intelligence. So it's almost as if he doesn't get to decide where this essay goes. It has to return to the statues. He has to have them come up again. The statue, there has to be kind of a structural echo between the people and the statues. And just obeying all of those structural elements that allows him to say like a couple things that might be more honest. Like I almost feel like this essay for me has like a really strident, confident William Golding, but then a little bit more doubtful, dynamic, unstable William Golding underneath it. And even the way he doesn't incorporate all, he vividly can't incorporate all three statues into his current worldview, to me is like telling. It's like drawing attention to the sort of more unstable, slightly less dominant voice. So I like hearing those together. So I just want to throw that out there. It was super nice to meet you. Teachers are definitely my heroes. They've been the most important people in my life. So much more, honestly, especially everyone kind of K through 12. College was great, but it just didn't make as much of an impact on my life. So I remember the last time I was in my hometown going out for nachos with my old English teacher, and she was just the most famous person, and I felt bad for her. She was like, I can't go out. Everyone wants to buy me lunch. Everyone wants to buy me lunch. So that's how we feel about you, even though no one's buying you lunch in the pandemic. So that's 35 years later that these people are still so important to me. So thank you guys for your work.